Right as China was facing an international crisis and a powerful wave of boycotts sweeping across Southeast Asia, a shocking event unfolded in the Java Sea. This was no accident. It was an unprecedented escalation in the struggle for influence between the two superpowers in the region. An Indonesian weapons depot exploded in the middle of the night, and China was believed to be the culprit behind it. Only a few hours later, the United States responded swiftly with a precision counterattack involving F-20 fighter jets and nuclear submarines secretly closing in on Indonesian waters. This wasn't just a warning, it was a hardline message delivered with military might, rapid response, and absolute precision. China was forced to realize that backing a nation into a corner would only push itself into the path of a fierce and unforgiving resistance. The incident began on a normal morning in Indonesia, as the country was suddenly plunged into a political and civil storm unseen since its post-independence era. Within 60 hours, over 400 simultaneous protests erupted across the entire archipelago. From small fishing ports in the east to industrial cities in the west, a single powerful slogan echoed, "Indonesia is not a Chinese colony." More than 2 decades of silence, patience, and compromise had come to an end. Indonesia's youth, the generation that grew up amidst foreign-invested industrial zones, finally spoke out. What had they witnessed? They saw high-output factories paying workers wages so low they couldn't survive. They saw special economic zones promoted as symbols of international cooperation, but which were actually places where laborers were forced to work 18-hour days with no health insurance and no right to vacation. They witnessed mining operations using outdated technology from 2014, dumping toxic waste directly into rivers, causing severe environmental pollution and devastating the lives of tens of millions of people. And above all, they were barred from accessing information from the press and international human rights organizations. This time, they wouldn't take it anymore. They chose to take to the streets, and the Jakarta government was forced to listen to the voice of its people. In just the first 3 days of the week, President Joko Widodo convened the National Security Council and immediately issued a statement that sent shockwaves through the region. The Indonesian government officially demanded that all companies with Chinese investment withdraw from the national economy within 6 months. This was not merely an economic dispute, it was a geopolitical resistance. Obviously, China was not going to easily accept losing a critical strategic foothold in Southeast Asia. Just 24 hours after Jakarta's announcement, Beijing issued a communique with unusually harsh language. China accused Indonesia of seriously violating the principles of international cooperation and declared it would implement comprehensive countermeasures. And those comprehensive countermeasures weren't just on paper. A Japanese military reconnaissance satellite detected a missile complex being deployed on the coast of Hainan province, aimed directly at Indonesian waters. Simultaneously, 3 Chinese Navy Type 052D destroyers were spotted leaving Sanya Port and heading toward the disputed exclusive economic zone near the Natuna Islands. And that very night, a massive explosion ripped through the Kalimantan Barat ammunition depot, a confirmed strategic weapons transit point for the Indonesian military. Initially, the explosion was thought to be an accident. However, satellite images from an RQ-4 Global Hawk, a strategic reconnaissance drone deployed by the U.S. from Guam, confirmed it was the result of a cruise missile strike, most likely launched from a Chinese submarine or destroyer offshore. All collected data indicated a low-altitude missile approaching from the southeast, consistent with the operational range of the YJ-12 missile, a weapon China often uses in its pressure campaigns. The question was, would China really choose to directly attack the territory of a sovereign nation just to protect its economic interests? And if so, what would happen next? The answer came from the Indonesian people themselves. Public outrage erupted into a second tsunami of protests, larger and more powerful than before. From the working class and student organizations to even former generals who had served in the military, all united under one message. We don't need aid, but we need protection. We need to be protected from a China that is no longer a partner but has become a strategic threat. And they understood that in this region, only the United States had the capability to support Indonesia. The Indonesian government officially sent an urgent request for assistance to Washington, asking for tactical support, intelligence sharing, and the establishment of an early warning zone. What stunned the world was that America's response this time didn't come after a week. or even a few days, but in a mere 4 hours from the moment the request was signed. President Donald Trump personally convened the U.S. National Security Council at the White House. The decision was made, and just hours later, the nuclear-powered aircraft carrier USS George Washington and its carrier strike group departed from Yokosuka, Japan, heading south, straight for Indonesia. Simultaneously, 3 more Global Hawks were deployed from Guam to Sulawesi airspace, establishing a 24/7 surveillance grid. The U.S. didn't just arrive early, it arrived with overwhelming force. From satellites, aircraft carriers, and drones to an integrated electronic intelligence network, everything was mobilized. Even a specialized electronic warfare unit from the U.S. Space Command was activated to help block Chinese interference signals targeting Indonesia's command systems. The tables had completely turned. From a nation standing alone against economic manipulation, Indonesia now possessed the world's most advanced technological shield, and the man behind these rapid, clear, and forceful decisions was Donald Trump, a president who understood that to maintain influence in Southeast Asia, you had to act faster, more precisely, and more proactively than Beijing. The operation to support Indonesia, codenamed Freedom Ring by the Pentagon, had officially begun. In a heavy silence, China was surely watching every move, forced to ask itself whether to push forward or retreat before being dragged into an uncontrollable spiral. Because this time, the United States wasn't just reacting. They had been preparing for a long time, and that preparation wasn't for negotiations. It was for the worst-case scenario. A new alliance was forming, and Indonesia was at its heart. The question is, when a nation dares to resist manipulation, and when the United States is ready to defend the values of freedom, is this the dawn of a new geopolitical era in Southeast Asia? At 2:17 a.m. Jakarta time, the early warning system off the coast of eastern Indonesia suddenly detected the arrival of a previously unrecorded naval force, the USS George Washington Carrier Strike Group, led by the Nimitz-class supercarrier. It was accompanied by 2 Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, a Ticonderoga-class cruiser, and a multi-purpose logistics ship. Just behind them, less than 200 nautical miles away, a group of Virginia-class submarines moved into combat position. No active sonar, no IFF transponder signals, just a single encrypted message transmitted to the Indonesian Armed Forces General Staff. We are here and ready to strike back. Minutes later, the entire airspace over East Java became the exclusive operational zone of American UAVs. From an altitude of over 15,000 meters, MQ-9 Reaper drones began a 45-minute sweep for any signs of Chinese submarines or warships operating offshore. A Chinese Fuching-class logistics ship was detected near the Lombok Strait. The ship was unarmed, but served as a crucial refueling and supply hub for PLA units stationed offshore. It was protected by a weak layer of air defense, with no early warning radar and no anti-stealth systems. An ideal target. And America's first precision strike was executed. A B-2 Spirit, the U.S.'s strategic stealth bomber, had taken off from Andersen Air Force Base in Guam, flying through the thick cloud cover of the tropical night. After just 6 hours, it approached the Bali Sea from the northwest, completely undetected by any radar. No jamming, no noise. 2 AGM-158C long-range anti-ship missiles, LRASM, were launched. With a range of over 900 kilometers, a low flight trajectory, and the ability to autonomously identify targets using a combination of GPS data and artificial intelligence, the missiles were on their way. The Chinese supply ship had less than 8 minutes to react, but no reaction came. And in the 9th minute, a massive explosion rocked the sea surface. Images captured by the Hubble satellite showed flames stretching for hundreds of meters, black smoke billowing into the ocean, and the fiery glow reflecting on the dark water. The entire crew was believed to have jumped overboard, and no Chinese rescue forces could respond in time. The first attack was silent, timed to the minute, and utterly impossible to counter. From the command center in Honolulu, the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command confirmed that Phase 1 of Operation Strike Back Precision was complete. President Joko Widodo received a direct call from President Donald Trump. It wasn't just an affirmation of support, but also a warning. China had crossed a red line, and it had to be shown that regional freedom was not up for negotiation. After losing contact with the Fuching supply ship, China immediately dispatched another flotilla of Type 052D destroyers southward, accompanied by an electronic reconnaissance ship and two small landing craft. The formation moved at high speed in a defensive triangle, with its radar constantly scanning the airspace ahead. But they were unaware that their entire journey was being closely tracked by an RQ-170 Sentinel drone from an altitude of over 18,000 meters. This data was relayed directly to a joint US-Indonesia combat center, a facility completed just 3 months prior, but now the coordinating heart of the entire operation. For the first time in history, Indonesia shared its complete ground radar data, coastal sensor feeds, and satellite imagery with the United States. And for the first time, the U.S. granted a Southeast Asian military direct access to its Starling Mill tactical satellite command network. A combined operational model had formed, no treaties signed, no declarations made, just action. As the Type 052D warships entered the restricted zone, they were immediately enveloped in an electronic warfare matrix. From beneath the waves, a Virginia-class submarine activated its ANBLQ-10 system, shattering the communication links between the PLA vessels. Their positioning signals were scrambled, and their target acquisition radars began to fail. At that moment, a pair of F-35B stealth fighters that had taken off from the USS America appeared suddenly from the south. Cutting through the wind at an altitude of less than 300 meters, they didn't even need missiles. With just 2 GBU-53B Stormbreaker-guided bombs, the warship's command center was destroyed. The entire command system fell into chaos. The Type 052D ships were no longer receiving orders. Their radars spun slowly, and their weapon systems shut down. A force once meant as a deterrent had now become a fleet of sitting ducks. The precision counterstrike was a success, but the U.S. wasn't done. On the ground, Indonesia had begun to act. A Kopassus Special Forces unit, pre-positioned on a small island off the coast of Flores, where China was secretly building a strategic satellite communication station, moved in. Under the cover of darkness, 4 Indonesian recon teams split into 3 assault prongs, each armed with light weapons, signal jammers, and new-generation night vision goggles supplied directly by the U.S. A close-quarters firefight erupted with gunfire and smoke grenades. In just 7 minutes, the Chinese base was neutralized. 2 PLA soldiers were captured alive, and their signal-receiving equipment was confiscated and immediately handed over to American analysts. At the same time, over 500 meters deep, an Indonesian Navy Nagapasa-class submarine silently approached the PLA's operational zone using its passive sonar system. The sub detected a signal from a Zhongdao-class corvette. Without warning, a Black Shark torpedo was fired. High speed, absolute precision. A few minutes later, a massive explosion shook the sea east of Lombok Island. The Chinese corvette was sunk. No one expected that in less than 24 hours, a nation fresh from a protest crisis could, in coordination with the United States, launch a comprehensive, precise, stealthy, and completely surprising counteroffensive. In a speech at the Pentagon, President Donald Trump emphasized, "We do not fight for territory, but for principle. If a sovereign nation is threatened by an aggressor, the United States will not stand by." That statement was not just a message. It was a warning to any nation that dared to use force to impose its influence on the region. China had now lost a supply ship, a secret base, a corvette, and its entire ability to coordinate warships in the Bali Sea. The most dangerous loss wasn't the material assets, but the feeling of losing control, losing the initiative, and losing the untouchable image that Beijing had spent years building. The question for the world was, would China continue to escalate, or would it retreat before getting caught in a no-win game? Because for Donald Trump, for the United States, and for an awakened Indonesia, the power game in Southeast Asia had only just begun. No one doubted it any longer. This was not a diplomatic crisis, nor was it a protest against foreign investment. This was war, in the full modern military sense of the term, and its epicenter was the skies and seas of southeastern Indonesia. After suffering heavy losses, a supply ship destroyed, a corvette sunk, an offshore command post obliterated, China refused to back down. They began to counterattack. But unlike their old-school deterrent tactics of massing warships or firing warning missiles, this time Beijing chose air warfare, and they brought a weapon never before deployed in Southeast Asia, the WS-43 kamikaze UAV. The WS-43 is a suicide drone, operating similarly to the Iranian-made Shahed 136. It's just over 2 meters long, flies low, is nearly invisible to radar, carries a 20 kilo fragmentation warhead, and, crucially, can be controlled in swarms from a command ship. Within 12 hours, China had launched over 60 of these UAVs from a converted logistics vessel near Hainan Island. They were programmed to fly in 3 drone triangular formations with a single target, Halim Perdana Kusuma Air Base on the outskirts of Jakarta. This was home to the Indonesian Air Force's F-16 squadron in the very location where the U.S. had integrated tactical data from its Starling Mill network. The attack was timed for dawn, the moment when radar is least effective due to atmospheric light reflection. A group of UAVs broke through the air defenses. 3 of them slammed into runway 2, causing minor damage. Another struck the tail of an F-16 undergoing maintenance. The explosion tore open the aircraft's fuselage, taking it out of service temporarily, but there were no casualties. However, China's kamikaze tactic sent a clear message. We can still hit your strategic locations deep inside your country. The question was, how would the United States respond this time? Would the strategy of precise, silent, calculated strikes remain? The answer was no. Donald Trump did not accept suicide attacks. He did not accept stealth fighters being challenged by cheap drones, and he would not accept a prolonged war of attrition. Just 1 hour after the attack, the president issued a direct order to the Indo-Pacific Command. We need one overwhelming strike, a single blow sufficient to force them to back down. And so, America's next move was planned, not from the ground, not from the deep sea, but from the sky, where the U.S. possessed the world's most powerful stealth weapon, the F-35 Lightning II. 2 F-35 squadrons were deployed from the USS America, flying in an arrowhead formation at an altitude of 4,000 meters. Their destination, a Chinese command ship operating covertly off the coast of the Natuna Islands. This ship was the nerve center controlling all the UAV attacks, disguised as a technical support vessel, but equipped with high-frequency antennas and dozens of satellite routers hidden under its wave shields. China thought it was hidden, but American infrared and electronic signal scanning technology saw right through the disguise. At exactly 21:08, the F-35s launched a salvo of 2 AGM-80HE AARGM missiles. This advanced anti-air radiation missile is designed to destroy any system emitting high-frequency control signals. The missiles screamed toward their target at nearly Mach 2, closing the distance in just over a minute. The explosion ripped the command ship apart. Drone footage from Indonesia showed a column of fire shooting more than 30 meters into the night sky. The shockwave radiated for hundreds of meters. The UAV control system was severed. All command signals went dead. The remaining drones in the air began to lose control. Some fell into the sea, some circled aimlessly, and others crashed to the ground without detonating. Beijing's showcase of kamikaze technology ended in disaster. But that wasn't all. The Type 052D destroyers were still out there, trying to hold formation near the Bali Sea. The U.S. wasn't going to let them be. This time they didn't use bombs or missiles. They used electronic warfare. From over 300 nautical miles away, the USS Michael Mansour, a Zumwalt-class destroyer, activated its ANSLQ-32 long-range electronic warfare system. A focused beam of directional energy was fired at the Chinese ships. It didn't cause fire or explosions, but it scrambled their entire radar, communications, and GPS systems. Control screens flickered and died. Navigational signals vanished. The PLA ships' responses became erratic, their air defense systems spinning uselessly, unable to lock on to any targets. Once again, technology had spoken. You don't need a physical attack when you can suffocate the enemy's ability to command. China understood that if they kept their ships there, they would become live target practice. Just then, Indonesia launched its final blow. A Nagapasa-class submarine, the same type that had sunk the corvette earlier, approached from a depth of 300 meters. Sonar data confirmed a Type 056A corvette was on an independent patrol, unprotected. Instantly, a Black Shark torpedo was launched. High speed, a shape-charged warhead. In that moment, the Chinese corvette was struck mid-ship and exploded. Water flooded in so fast that the entire vessel vanished from radar in under 3 minutes. In total, in less than 48 hours, the U.S. and Indonesia had combined to destroy a major supply ship, a command vessel, 2 warships, and an entire fleet of kamikaze UAVs. More importantly, they shattered Beijing's strategic confidence, not just in its strength, but in its ability to respond to a fast, precise, and unpredictable adversary. On Chinese social media, citizens began asking questions. Are we really in control of the situation? Why are our most advanced warships so easily disabled? Are we going too far? Meanwhile, in the U.S., Donald Trump declared in an emergency press conference, "We do not seek war, but if challenged, we will respond with everything we have, and we have the most powerful technology in the world." That statement sent a clear signal, not just to China, but to the entire world. The U.S. wasn't returning to Southeast Asia. It had never left. And now it was tightening its alliances with nations brave enough to say no, like Indonesia, a country that had gone from being seen as the backyard for Chinese projects to a strategic combat partner. This was happening on a real battlefield, with every strike making Beijing tremble. The battlefields of the air, sea, and subsea now belong to the side that combined national will, tactical information, and precision technology. Back on the front lines, China issued no statement of withdrawal, no official news report, not a single line from Xinhua news agency. But the skies over eastern Indonesia grew quiet, and the waters near Bali were empty of Chinese naval formations. It was a silent retreat, but everyone understood it was the inevitable outcome. After more than 72 hours of precision counterattacks from the US and Indonesia, after a series of devastating strikes on its logistics ship, kamikaze UAV system, floating command center, and even its Type 052D destroyers, China had been pushed out of a sphere of influence it once believed was its own. The fleet retreated, radars went dark, and planes were grounded. For the first time in nearly 2 decades of naval expansion, the Chinese Navy was forced to accept a defeat on the battlefield. But behind that retreat was something Beijing's leadership could not admit publicly. They had come up against an impenetrable shield, an invisible barrier established by tactical satellite networks, hundreds of multi-layered sensors, UAVs, submarines, mobile radars, and advanced military data analysis algorithms developed by the United States. This was the expanded Integrated Intelligence, Surveillance, and Reconnaissance ISR system, deployed in its entirety for the first time in Southeast Asia. It wasn't just protecting the U.S. carrier strike group or monitoring the skies over Jakarta. It blanketed the entire island chain from Natuna to Maluku. And that rendered all of China's calculations meaningless. Because even if they sent more UAVs or even J-16 fighters, they would be detected long before they reached firing range. Sensor data was relayed to the command center in less than 4 seconds. A warship's counterattack could be launched in just 2. The gap between being detected and being destroyed was now measured in moments. China understood this, and they began to pull back, step by step, quietly without admission, but with full resignation. At the United Nations Security Council, China tried to protest America's military intervention and its support for Indonesia. But its claims were immediately refuted by other members with satellite imagery, providing clear proof that it was Beijing that launched the first missile, Beijing that deployed kamikaze UAVs, and Beijing that turned Indonesian ports into targets. From that moment, the global information narrative flipped. No one believed China's peaceful rise story anymore. No one was surprised by America's presence in Indonesia. Everything had been proven by the actions in Jakarta. The people poured into the streets again, not to protest but to celebrate. For the first time in over 20 years, their nation no longer had to bow to Chinese corporations, no longer had to fear being sued under investment laws, and no longer had to turn a blind eye to industrial zones that barred journalists. They had reclaimed their economic sovereignty and were now protected by an undeclared alliance that was more effective than any formal treaty. President Joko Widodo declared, "We did not choose war, but when pushed to our limit, we had to stand up." He sent his thanks directly to President Donald Trump, not with diplomatic ceremony, but with a political commitment. Indonesia officially signed a joint declaration on strategic security cooperation with the United States. For the first time, a Southeast Asian nation pledged to share real-time tactical data with the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command. For the first time, a joint coordination hub called the Sharing Center was established with direct operational authority from the U.S., Indonesia, and regional partners. No troops needed to be deployed, no permanent bases built. All it took was technology and trust, and the shield was formed. Not a single missile got through, not a single UAV returned, and not a single warship could escape its tracking. Everything was stopped at the front line and, if necessary, eliminated in under 10 minutes. This was the pinnacle of modern warfare. No need for prolonged, bloody conflict. Control the sky, the surface, and the data, and you can force your opponent to retreat. China understood this perfectly. What they hadn't anticipated was that this shield didn't come from a treaty or a piece of paper, but from the personal strategy of one man, Donald Trump. He was the one who greenlit strike-back precision. He was the one who authorized access to Starling Mill for Indonesia. He was the one who signed the order to deploy the carrier strike group. And he was the one who showed that the U.S. wasn't withdrawing from Asia. It was just waiting for the right moment to reassert its role, a role not of confrontation, but of protecting nations willing to defend their sovereignty. People can argue about Donald Trump on many issues, but one thing is undeniable. When he makes a decision, no force can stop America's response. And it was that very response that created the shield for Indonesia, that handed China its first major defeat in the Belt and Road era, and that created a new model of alliance, not bound by politics, but tightly integrated by tactics. It's a model that could be replicated in the Philippines, Thailand, Vietnam, and Malaysia. The question is, what will Beijing do? Escalate further or completely restructure its strategy? It's clear they can no longer impose their will with old-school force, no longer use economics to bully diplomacy, and certainly no longer attack without facing a counterblow. Modern warfare doesn't require a lot of guns. It just needs a shield strong enough, an alliance built on trust, and a technological platform precise enough. That is exactly what the United States, under the leadership of Donald Trump, achieved. And as that shield extends over Southeast Asia, the balance of power has shifted. Not because China is weak, but because the United States decided to show its strength at the right time, in the right way, and in the right place. China can continue to build ships, erect bases, and test new technology. But the next time it crosses the line, that shield will not hesitate to strike back. And when the shield can strike back, the attacker has nowhere left to hide. Thank you for watching our full analysis of these developments. If you're passionate about geopolitics, military power, and what's really happening behind the scenes on the global stage, then this is the place for you. Don't forget to follow the channel.